Good afternoon and welcome to the NCBP 21st Century Lawyer Virtual Session. My name is Lisa Liu. I'm the chair of the NCBP's 21st Century Lawyer Committee. And today's session is entitled Sleep, Ethics, and Well-Being for Lawyer Leaders. Before I introduce our presenter, Robin Wolpert, I have a few housekeeping items I'd like to mention. One, if you have not already opened your navigation menu, which is either at the top or the bottom of your screen, please make sure that you do so. Within the menu options, you will see a Q&A box. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the session for attendees to ask questions and to share. So please post your questions in the Q&A box throughout the program. In addition, there's also a chat box, which can be used to communicate with me, other attendees, and our speaker. So let's just start by doing a quick check to make sure the chat box is working. For those of you attending, would you please type in your name and where you're from? That we can test to see if it's working. Thank you for doing so. And make sure you send your comments in the chat box to the entire audience so that everyone can see and respond. So let's get started, and let me introduce our speaker, Robin Wolpert. Robin is the chair of the Minnesota Lawyers Professional Responsibility Board, and she serves on the NCBP Executive Council, as well as the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing. She's also the past president of the Minnesota State Bar Association. Robin earned her JD from Cornell Law School and practices at Sapientia Law Group in Minneapolis. She's a litigation and appellate strategist. She focuses on criminal defense, complex civil litigation, and appellate practice, and ethics and compliance. Robin is a former prosecutor, an in-house compliance director at 3M, and partner at Green Espel in Minneapolis. Robin leverages her unique blend of government, in-house, and private sector experience to develop creative and practical solutions for her clients. Now, before becoming a lawyer, Robin earned a PhD from the University of Chicago in the fields of political science, cognitive and behavioral economics, and political psychology. Her scholarship and teaching at Georgetown and the University of South Carolina focused on constitutional law, judicial selection, public opinion and the courts, and courts and social change. Robin is a national leader and public speaker on well-being, ethics, and diversity and inclusion. Please join me in welcoming Robin. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, everyone. I am really so happy to be here to talk about lawyer well-being, sleep, and ethics. And I think it's so particularly relevant right now in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. But I guess my main take-home message for all of you is that sleep is related to everything you care about. So it's related to your personal life, your professional life, and of course, your leadership in the legal profession. So everything you need to do and everything you want to do, the foundation for it is sleep. So let's begin with the puzzle of lawyer well-being in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis and how we might help our ailing profession, a profession that's been ailing even before the coronavirus. So you may all recall the blockbuster studies that came out in 2016 that related to the law student survey as well as our legal profession. And I'm just going to go briefly through these figures just so you remember and set the backdrop for the notion that we have a patient, the legal profession, that's been in crisis even before COVID-19. So we see with the law student survey, for example, that many law students suffered depression, severe anxiety, suicidal thoughts. And these were, again, blockbuster studies from 2016, where a quarter of them are at risk for alcoholism. And then you remember again also the lawyer study that came out in 2016 based on 2015 data, which generally showed that lawyers are far more at risk than the general population to engage in behavior, chemical dependency, and problem drinking. And it's particularly pronounced for lawyers under 50. And so what we learned with the lawyer profession was that We also suffer depression, severe anxiety, and suicidal thoughts that are much, much higher than the general population, and that our youngest lawyers are at risk. So I wanted to remind you of the National Task Force, the big findings that came into the legal profession in about 2016, and then the National Task Force report that sought to create a movement toward improving the health of the profession and focusing on creating cultural change. So the key take home from the National Task Force was that to be a good lawyer, you have to be a healthy lawyer. But I would just add, to be even a functioning person, you have to have sleep. And that's what we're going to talk about. Your duty of competence also includes maintaining your own long-term well-being. That's again from the National Task Force report. So we have a huge challenge. This was the challenge before COVID-19, where we had where we had a profession that was suffering much greater than the general population in terms of mental health and chemical dependency. And now we have coronavirus, which again is adding to our stress and anxiety and is putting huge pressure on the profession. All sectors of the profession are impacted in terms of potential loss of income. We as bar leaders are also at risk because we are responsible for assisting our lawyers and our bar leaders throughout our states and communities to function, serve clients, but also lead people and provide information for people to protect public health and safety. The well-being is defined in the National Task Force report as a continuous process where we're trying and striving to thrive throughout all dimensions of life. And here's that famous chart that came out of that report that talks about many, many dimensions of lawyer well-being: intellectual, spiritual, occupational, emotional, social, physical. All these things are important and count. But I ask you to consider that the foundation for all aspects of well-being is sleep. In fact, the foundation for our existence and our health and our performance is sleep. I urge you to read the book by Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep. And it was a blockbuster when it came out because it answered all the basic questions about why we sleep. And it turns out that we sleep for so many reasons that without it, we can't even, it doesn't even matter whether we eat well or thrive in our professions. We can't even do it without sleep. So Matthew Walker begins his book with a statement that I always love. It says, "Amazing breakthrough. We've discovered a revolutionary new treatment that makes you live longer. It enhances your memory and makes you more creative. It makes you look more attractive and keeps you slim and lowers your food cravings. It protects you from cancer and dementia, colds and the flu, heart attacks and stroke, not to mention diabetes. You'll be happier, less depressed, and less anxious." Now, doesn't this sound like just the thing that I would like to order this elixir for myself? Well, it turns out that it's sleep. And I also urge you to watch Matthew Walker's TED Talk, where he begins by talking about testicles. And what he does is he says, well, if you are a man and you continually get 5 hours of sleep or less, not only are your testicles smaller, but you have lower levels of testosterone. In fact, your levels of testosterone are equal to a man 10 years older than you. So he begins with the topic of testosterone and testicles and moves on to the serious and significant causal relationship between sleep and all aspects of our physiology, as well as our brain performance. Whoops. Now, most of us are lawyers and we're leaders and we're very busy. And so we're supposed to spend a third of our time sleeping. And I always thought, well, that's a waste of time because I want to be able to do so many things, and spending 8 hours a day on sleep, I always want to cram as much as I can in a day just because I feel like I want to live and I want to do all these amazing things. Well, it turns out that I'm wrong, and that in fact, spending 8 hours a day, a third of your life sleeping, is some of the most productive thing you can do in your life. Sleep and memory. So sleep is a memory aid. So before you even learn anything or take in any information into your brain, which is your inbox, you could imagine it as an inbox in a computer, you have to prepare your brain to accept those memories. And then later, after you've gotten all these memories in your inbox, if you want to remember them, if you want to click the save button on your memories, you need sleep. So this is a diagram or a graph of our sleep. And what happens is we start off at night going into deep NREM sleep. So our cycles of sleep go between deep NREM sleep and REM sleep. And as you can tell, as you go on later in the night, the balance shifts. In the first part of the night, you focus mainly on NREM sleep, and then that shifts to REM sleep later in the night. So what's going on there? So NREM sleep, what it does is you've got all these memories in your brain inbox, and it takes all those memories and it takes it from short-term storage to a long-term storage site that makes it much more stable, okay? So you're gonna actually save those memories by transferring those memories to long-term storage. That's what happens during NREM sleep. REM sleep, by contrast, what it does is it allows your different parts of your brain to make connections with each other that don't normally happen in your waking state. And so that's associated with wisdom and creativity, because ideas can be shared among different parts of your brain. And so you can come up with ideas that you never would have thought of during the regular day without that sleep. It's also related to emotional intelligence and basically emotional stability, in the sense that if you don't have REM sleep, you're more likely to see things through a fear lens. You're going to be stressed and anxious, and so you're going to see things with fear, and you're going to have emotional swings without enough REM sleep. So your REM sleep is kind of like an emotional bath. An emotional therapy that happens while you sleep, and it removes the sting of things that happen during the day and gives you a great start to a new day once you've had sufficient REM sleep. The failure point for human beings is 16 hours. After 16 hours, your brain simply starts to degrade in terms of its performance. And so the bottom line is that you need more than 7.5 hours of sleep a night to maintain cognitive performance. So the recommendation is 7.5 to 9 hours per sleep. Other than that, if you don't do that, your brain will begin to fail. Now, here's something really important. So I used to think that, okay, I'll sleep 5 or 6 hours during the week, and on the weekend, I will make up for it, and I'll sleep 10 hours. And the bottom line is the science doesn't support that at all. In other words, what it means is that you cannot make up for lost sleep on the weekend. You will never get enough recovery sleep to make up for what you've lost. The brain isn't like a bank, okay? It doesn't work that way. It's just physically incapable of working like a bank. So if you sleep 10 hours a night, you can't say I have a credit and now I can get less sleep the next night. You can't do it that way. It just doesn't work that way. And so it's disappointing to learn, but that was one of the first things that really turned my head about the neuroscience of sleep. Your brain does not work like a bank. It's a myth. We've been all living based on a myth that we can bank sleep, but we can't. So your brain without sleep. So even 7 hours a day, and you see the data here on your screen, even 7 hours a day, your brain is just as dysfunctional as it would be without, with severely depriving yourself of sleep, okay? So 7 hours consistently, if you're a 7 hour a night sleeper, you're still severely sleep deprived and your brain is not functioning at the appropriate level. And you can't restore that performance with extra sleep. You just can't get yourself back to normal levels. The big thing is you're impaired about being impaired. So you all know the story about, people who drink too much and they say, give me the car keys, give me those car keys, I'm fine, I can drive. Well, sleep deprivation unfortunately works the same way, where if you've consistently had 7 hours of sleep a night for the last several years, or if you're someone who gets 5 or 6 hours a night, you are impaired about being impaired. So when you say, oh, I'm fine, I can function on 5 or 6 hours of sleep, actually the neuroscience says that that's false. There are 0% people who can function adequately without the required 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep per night. And so your notion that I'm fine or I can do it, you are very highly sleep deprived, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the consequences are for that. So why sleep? So why would you care about sleep? Well, as I said, sleep is critical for everything we want to do. All of our performance, learning, memorizing, logical decisions, social relations, all of it is related to sleep. So alcohol is one thing that's part of the culture of being a lawyer, right? In addition to bragging that we work really hard and we don't need a lot of sleep, which is debunked by the neuroscience, alcohol is also dangerous to sleep. So it's a sedative. So what alcohol does is it knocks you out. Worse, it inhibits REM sleep. It inhibits REM sleep. And what that means is if you have got this suppressor for REM sleep, all the benefits that you count on for emotional stability and creativity and so forth, and managing social relations, all of those things are impaired if you consume alcohol. And so even moderate amounts in the afternoon or evening reduce REM sleep. So one of the recommendations, Matthew Walker is one of the foremost experts globally on sleep, and his recommendation is that you should not consume alcohol after 2 p.m. because if you do, you will be disrupting your sleep, so you'll wake up more in the middle of the night if you have alcohol before you go to sleep. You'll also knock yourself out, but not get the true REM sleep benefits. And so that's the recommendation, is that alcohol will stay in your system. And so the best way to drink is to actually have afternoon happy hours rather than evening happy hours. In terms of mental health, so sleep deprivation or disruption contributes to all major psychiatric conditions. And so we've seen a mental health challenge in our profession, and sleep disturbance is related to that. Okay, so if you're not getting enough sleep, it's likely to cause mental health challenges. The World Health Organization has declared a sleep loss epidemic in the industrialized world. And the shorter you sleep, the shorter your life. That's the bottom line message from the neuroscience. Let's go into a little bit more detail here. So staying up late. So a lot of us like to stay up late, and then we get up at the same time we regularly do every day. What happens is, remember that graph I showed you where you get most of your NREM sleep in the early stages of your 8-hour cycle? If you stay up late, you're missing your NREM sleep, okay? Because that occurs mainly during those early moments when you fall asleep. And so you're not just losing, 4 hours, but you're losing 60%, for example, of your NREM sleep, which is a big deprivation. If you wake up early, okay, and so you're losing your NREM sleep, you're not just, if you get up a couple hours early, you're not just losing 25% of your sleep, but 60 to 90% of your REM sleep, okay? So that's why it's important to give yourself a sleep opportunity of 8 hours. Physical health. The impact of lack of sleep on your physical health is very astonishing. If you routinely get less than 6 or 7 hours of sleep, it impacts your immune system. It contributes to Alzheimer's. In fact, there's a causal relationship that's recently been demonstrated between Alzheimer's and lack of sleep. because it turns out that during NREM sleep, your brain gets a neurochemical bath that washes away the plaques and toxins that are the cause of Alzheimer's. So that's a real challenge if you don't get enough sleep with Alzheimer's. With your immune system, what happens when you short sleep, that's what it's called, if you short sleep, what happens is your DNA is eroded when you don't get enough sleep. So say you get 6 hours of sleep for 1 week, it changes your gene profile. So what happens is your genes get distorted, and the ones that get increased in terms of their activity are those related to tumor production, inflammation, cardiovascular disease, and stress. And the ones that get turned off are the ones that deal with your immune system, those natural killer cells. Those genes get turned off. And so less than 8 hours of sleep a night, even for 1 night, changes your gene activity profile. It disrupts blood sugar levels, and so you can become pre-diabetic. It is associated with cardiovascular disease. Eating. So we all eat when we're tired because lack of sleep disrupts our metabolism, okay? And this is why when you're sleep deprived, dieting is completely futile. Exercise is completely futile, because what you're losing is your lean body mass rather than your fat. Mental health. Sleep disruption contributes to depression, anxiety, and suicidality. Driving, okay? So we all drive to court, we drive to our offices, and these statistics are just numbing. Vehicular accidents caused by drowsy driving exceed those caused by alcohol and drugs combined. And the problem with lack of sleep and driving, here's why lack of sleep is more dangerous than drinking and driving or doing drugs and driving. With drugs and alcohol, at least you respond when you're behind the wheel. The problem is with sleep deprivation, if you have a micro nap, what ends up happening is you don't respond at all. That's the problem. And that's why driving is so dangerous with lack of sleep. Performance, and you all know this as lawyers. You feel like you can't learn as much, memorize, make logical decisions, navigate social and psychological challenges. Those are all the hallmarks of being an excellent attorney, and your performance is undermined by doing that. So, signs of insufficient sleep. After waking up in the morning, could you fall back asleep at 10? Could you function without caffeine before noon? Those are signs of insufficient sleep. Now, the World Health Organization has designated night shift work as a carcinogen, all right, because of those huge connections in the neuroscience literature that show lack of sleep causes such physical harm to people who are not sleeping well. And so night shift work is a carcinogen in the industrialized world. Okay, the World Health Organization has also declared a sleep loss epidemic throughout all industrialized nations. We are the only species that deprives itself of sleep. No other species on Earth deprives itself of sleep. So the shorter you sleep, the shorter your lifespan. And of course, sleep and lack of sleep are related to rationality and composure. And what happens, and I think this is really relevant for diversity and inclusion as well as performance. When we see people who are different than us, we normally have fear. It's wired into us. It's wired into our brains that we're going to have fear. But when you have lack of sleep, it enhances the activity of your lizard brain, which is going to make you even more fear-based when interacting with people who are different than you. It just undermines everything as lawyer leaders stand for in terms of diversity and inclusion and helping the next generation of lawyers and creating things with people who are different than us, which is, of course, the foundation of creative work. Driving. So we talked about that. Sleep deprivation makes you stop responding altogether. Caffeine. All of us lawyers seem to be addicted to caffeine. And the reason why you need to avoid it in order to enhance sleep is because throughout the day, there's a chemical called adenosine that builds up in your brain over time. Okay, it builds up over those 16 hours before you need to go to sleep. And that's sleep pressure. And that sleep pressure is what gets you to sleep at night. And so caffeine mutes that adenosine, all right? But caffeine also that's why it keeps you awake, because it mutes adenosine. But the problem is caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 7 hours and a quarter life of 12 hours. So say you go to bed, it's like if you have caffeine, at noon, okay, and it's got a quarter life of 12 hours, it's like going to bed and taking a shot of a quarter of a cup of coffee and trying to go to bed. That's what it's like when you have caffeine, even at noon or afternoon. That's the impact on your sleep. Alcohol. We've talked about alcohol as a sedative. It knocks you out. That's what it does. It doesn't induce natural sleep. In fact, it makes you wake up more frequently when you're trying to sleep. And again, it's one of the most powerful suppressors of REM sleep. Mental health. We've talked about that. LED lights. So LED lights disrupt our sleep and disrupt our circadian rhythm. So it starts to wind back our circadian, our rhythm if we are in front of screens, LED devices, phones, okay? That's gonna interfere with your ability to sleep. Naps. A lot of us know about the whole idea of power naps, and naps as short as 20 minutes can help you and enhance your performance. But here's the thing, naps are dangerous. And the reason they're dangerous is that, remember, that adenosine that's building up in your brain throughout the day, that buildup is what gets you to sleep at night. But if you take a nap, remember, you're reducing the buildup of that adenosine. So if you take naps, especially if they're long naps, you are not helping yourself fall asleep at night, and they can be harmful to you. So and they also can't be used as a substitute. So if I got 6 hours of sleep and say I'm going to go take a 2-hour nap, it can't act as a substitute for the lost sleep. So you can't use naps to make up for all the sleep you've lost. So they're nice if they're 20 minutes, that you get enough REM sleep in them, so you're actually getting deep sleep. But as long as they're short, they can be helpful. But when they're used too much, what it does is it reduces your ability to get regular sleep at night. Sleep strategies. So all of us are thinking about sleep strategies. What can I do? The biggest thing is a regular schedule. So you got to wake up and go to bed at the same time every night. So that regularity is key. And as I just said, no naps. If you have a problem falling asleep at night, you shouldn't be taking naps. You shouldn't exercise more than 2 or 3 hours before your bedtime. And you have to avoid caffeine and nicotine. And so that half-life and quarter life I was telling you about with caffeine means that you really shouldn't be drinking caffeine after the time noon, if you want to fall to sleep later that night, because it'll still be in your system and will inhibit sleep. Alcohol, again, for the same reasons we've previously discussed. It will suppress REM sleep, but more importantly, it's just a sedative, and you're going to be tossing and turning all night and waking up, and you may not even remember that, but you will not be refreshed and will not get restored. You have to avoid large meals and beverages at night, because that will interfere with sleep. And the other thing is 65 degrees. So you need to sleep in a dark, cold, gadget-free bedroom, 65 degrees. And that's because you have to lower your core body temperature in order to fall asleep. Your body wants to lower its core temperature. And so that's why you should be sleeping in a cool bedroom. Sleeping pills, do not use sleeping pills. And the reason is it's the same as alcohol, similar. It knocks you out, okay? It's a sedative, but it does not induce naturalistic sleep. So sleeping pills actually are not helpful for getting sleep. The last item on my list is sleep divorce. And so you may want to consider sleep divorce. So that would mean you and your partner actually sleep in a separate room, and that enhances sleep. And the reason is you may have a partner who snores a lot, perhaps they have sleep apnea. And so that person is going to interrupt your own sleep and keep you up. And so sleep divorce is something that Matthew Walker and other neuroscientists recommend because you can actually get the kind of sleep you need. And now you may say, well, that might, inhibit intimate relations with my partner if I'm actually sleeping in a different bedroom. But as I told you earlier, people who get less sleep, their testosterone levels are decreased, their testicles are smaller. That we have same issues with women in terms of their reproductive health. So what you will find is that people actually have more interest in intimate relations with sleep divorce. So just something to consider. All right. Sleep is the most effective thing we can do to reset our brain and body health each day. And, again, with the coronavirus, it's a real challenge. I think people are more anxious. They're working probably harder and longer than they've had to previously because of all the new challenges that are coming up. And what I would say is that sleep is probably the best thing you can do to deal with your own performance and the health and well-being of yourself and your family, of your profession, of all the leadership initiatives that you're engaged in. That's going to be the most important thing. So I'm going to leave you with that slide, and I'm going to open it up to questions. And the reason I wanted to keep this short and have a lot of questions is because in my experience, there's lots of questions from people. So I'll turn it over to Lisa. I know she's got some waiting for me.
So Robin, let's start. Someone asked when you said no sleeping pills, what about melatonin?
So melatonin will actually work if you actually do it the right way. It's going to impact your circadian rhythm and your ability when you interact with the light in your environment. There's going to be a very precise calibration on how to use that in order to enhance sleep. But you have to follow the directions on how to do it. Okay. But yes, you can use melatonin to do that.
Okay, so for those of you, you have questions, please do type them into the Q&A and we'll get started on them. I see some people are writing into the chat room. So another question, Robin, what are the best ways to break a lifetime of bad habits around this?
Well, I think going back to that slide about the way to start clean. So, my view is when you start something new, it's better not to look at the past and beat yourself up over it. Just say you're going to start something new and you're going to start a new routine, new procedures. So what you're going to do is you're going to commit and basically put your integrity on the line and say, look, I'm going to go to bed at 10 every night or midnight every night, and I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep, and it's non-negotiable. Here's the thing. With the health consequences of lack of sleep, I think your ability to sleep 8 hours a night has to be non-negotiable, given the World Health Organization's, announcements on a sleep epidemic, and that night shift work is a carcinogen, and that we have a huge epidemic of sleep loss. It has to be non-negotiable. Your health has to be non-negotiable. So treat it like that. So one way to do that is to set a schedule and say, I'm going to bed, and make a commitment that you're going to do it, and that you're going to teach people around you to respect that. I talk to a lot of new lawyers about this issue because new lawyers want to create the cultural change that will impact and improve the well-being of our profession. And lawyer leaders across the country are working to do the same thing. But changing the culture of the profession means setting an expectation at all levels that 8 hours of sleep is non-negotiable. So I would do that and then follow those guidelines, which is reduce the core temperature of your body before going to sleep by lowering the temperature in your house. Not looking at computer screens and gadgets and TVs a couple hours before you're ready to go to sleep. Not consuming alcohol, not having caffeine after lunchtime. All those things can help. But I think that it's regularity that's the most important thing.
So Robin, you said no LED lights because that will interrupt, and you talked about computers. So one of our listeners is asking about reading in bed. What about reading in bed? Is that a good idea or not?
Well, a couple of things on that. If you read a book, and let's just talk about the activity and then where you do it. So the activity is reading. So if you're reading a book, that's fine. If you're reading it on an LED screen, you should dim it as much as possible. But the problem is that those LED lights are impacting your circadian rhythm. And so that's why you don't want to be doing that. So that's why you should be screen free. The other thing is with the bedroom. So human brains are highly associative. So if you associate your bedroom with activity other than sleep, you're training your brain that things other than sleep happen in your bedroom. And what that means is that when you fall asleep, your brain is already knows that things other than sleep happen in that bedroom. and so because of that, you're not teaching your brain that the bedroom is a place where you go to sleep. And so what I would suggest is not reading in bed, finding another location for activity. And then when it's time to go to bed, you move to that bedroom because that bedroom is now associated by your brain as a place where sleep occurs.
So this next question, Robin, is more along a parenting question, right? So if you have a young child, a toddler who wakes you up several times a night, any suggestions for how to deal with that? You know, what about co-sleeping? You had talked about the sleep divorce earlier. One of our listeners is asking whether or not you have any suggestions when you do get interrupted, because that's just the way your life is with a child.
Yeah, and that's the way it's going to be. And your child actually, the book, and I would again urge everyone, parents who care about their kids should read this book because you learn about the sleep cycles of all stages of a human being and what happens for babies versus toddlers versus teenagers and the sleep needs that they have and their circadian rhythms and so forth. So all of those things are important to learn about because you can learn about how to enhance the performance of your children in music and athletics and science versus the humanities. All those things you can learn by reading that book and developing sleep strategies for your kids, whatever age they may be. And also as you get older, the same thing, older adults versus middle-aged adults. So there are sleep strategies for all those. But in terms of your kids and dealing with interrupted sleep, I mean, that is something that as long as you're caring for your child, you will suffer. So the question is, can you stay on a regular sleep cycle and use naps strategically, not as a substitute for lost sleep, but as something that it could enhance your performance? And so I would urge you to take a look at the chapter in Matthew Walker's book about how to strategically use naps to enhance your cognitive function when during the regular day you're not getting enough sleep. But at night with frequent interrupting, that's going to impair your sleep. And if you're taking care of your child and you're committed to taking care of your child, you will suffer those sleep, interruptions.
So, Robin, I think a lot of us have heard about sleep strategies over the years. So one of our listeners is asking, do you have any suggestions or best practices for quieting the stress-related chatter that goes on in your head?
Yep. And so meditation is a very powerful way to quiet that chatter. And a lot of people, poo-poo meditation or say, I can't do it, or it's not for me. But even just sitting still in a quiet room and just focusing on your breathing and not trying to do anything more than that can help reduce the anxiety that you are experiencing, as well as the thoughts in your head if you focus on your breathing. And so that's one of the ways to quiet that chatter. Another thing, it was reported in the New York Times, I think it was about a year and a half ago, about something called tremor release exercises. And tremor release exercises was developed by a public health professional who was in Israel and is someone who has trained all sorts of military personnel, first responders, and so forth to tremor release exercises. And if you look them up on the internet, you can see what they are. And what they do is they slowly build up various pressure and tremors in they're very easy exercises to do. You build up a tremoring mechanism in your body, and then you can release it. And that also produces results that are very similar to meditation in terms of reducing anxiety and stress. And this official who developed tremor release exercises was dealing with huge, war-stricken countries that were facing a public health crisis of stress and anxiety, related to war or national tragedies, like eruptions of volcanoes or huge destruction due to natural disasters. And so he's taught military personnel, first responders, how to, in groups and for massive populations, how to reduce stress and anxiety through tremoring. And so that's another way if meditation doesn't work for you.
So Robin, bar leaders, especially those who are coming into their positions, they're all busy. The reason they're bar leaders is they're good at what they're doing and they have a lot on their plate. So for our new bar leaders, any suggestions on how they balance their day job with their new responsibilities and put that all in and still get their 8 hours?
Yeah. One of the reasons I started teaching about sleep, Lisa, was because our next generation's at risk. So when we learned from the 2016 studies that came out about the profession and also about law students, what we see is that the youngest lawyers are hit the hardest in terms of their risk for stress, anxiety, chemical dependency, alcoholism, and suicidal. They're most at risk. So my advice to new lawyers was, we have to create a cultural change, just like the National Task Force has suggested that we do. And the cultural change comes from the top, from lawyer leaders, managing partners in law firms, heads of government agencies, but it comes from below too. It comes from new lawyer leaders and people coming out of law school committed to cultural change and their own well-being, recognizing that well-being is not nice to have, it's critical for your life. And sleep isn't nice to have, it's critical for your life. So as education gets out about that, and as people educate everyone around them about the importance of sleep, you have to just talk about it constantly, how important it is, that it's non-negotiable, that it's critical to my brain even functioning. You got to start that conversation as a new lawyer, and the leaders of these organizations should be educated so they can start those conversations as well. And then you make it non-negotiable to yourself that you're not going to do that. And so how do you balance all those things? Remember, your brain's function is going to be enhanced if you've had 8 hours of sleep. So you know what it's like to stay up late or wake up early. You've either deprived yourself of 60 to 90% of your REM sleep or 60 to 90% of your NREM sleep. All that's going to be impacting your performance. So the conversations that we're having in Minnesota with new lawyers and lawyer leaders is to emphasize that it's not nice to have, but it's critical to your brain function. And then with you being able to maximize your performance during the 16 hours you are awake, that's how you best serve your clients. And that's how you cost effectively serve your clients. And that's how you engage in the creative activities that are critical for being a lawyer leader. So those are the conversations that we've been driving through the legal profession in Minnesota, but it begins with the newer lawyers and it begins with the people on top. And the idea is that the pressure from the bottom and the pressure from the top will create expectations and changes in the culture. Right now, at this point in time, you have to be part of that conversation. And so that's what I'm urging people to do. And that's what we've been doing in Minnesota. But I'd be happy to talk to whoever asks that question offline because that's really what we're working for so hard in Minnesota.
So, Robin, lots of bar associations have wellness programs now. So, what would you recommend as programs that bar associations may adopt or implement for their members to make this to change the culture and make sleep a priority?
Well,
What
I know that
programs?
right now I do about an hour and a half CLE across the state of Minnesota everywhere, mainly for new lawyers. I go to law schools, I go in-house. We do national summits, statewide summits in Minnesota. And so that's one of the things that we've been doing is just getting information out because people don't know. And I'll tell you, I didn't know. So I think I told I just taught a law school class last week and I said, I think I probably practiced my first 15 years under a whole series of myths that are not true, such as, I want to, stay awake as long as possible, that I can sleep on the weekends, that, I'm just fine, I'm functioning just fine. All those myths that we talked about that have been debunked by neuroscience, we still act as if they're true. There's a stigma in the legal profession. So if you ask for sleep, you sound like you're lazy, right? Don't we have a stigma associated with sleep? In fact, lawyers like to say how much they didn't sleep. So it's seen as bragging rights if you are showing up to court saying, I only got 4 hours of sleep last night. We've got to make it so that that's something that people would be embarrassed to brag about because it would really show their lack of self-management rather than a bravado that they can function without sleep, because the neuroscience shows that that's not true. Not only does the neuroscience show it's not true, it shows that it's dangerous to your health. Every aspect of your physiology is negatively impacted. So I think part of it is getting rid of that stigma that sleep means lazy. Sleep actually means someone's committed to their own health and the health and well-being of the people around them, the people they're leading, and their clients for client service. So I think that's the big thing, is debunking that and starting conversations and really creating a national movement where people become aware of the problems with lack of sleep in terms of just your function and your ability and your memory and your creativity and your commitment to diversity and inclusion. All those things are impacted by lack of sleep. So I would say the first thing is get information out. Whenever I give this talk to a live audience, people just are stunned. They have tons of questions and they want me to keep talking because I'm saying things they've never heard before.
Robin, there are lots of conversations about being mindful and practicing mindfulness. So if you're one of those who practice mindfulness before bed, what do you think about using apps like Calm in the bedroom? Because you talked about before limiting gadgets and LED lights. So what if you're using an app right before bed to practice mindfulness? And if you shouldn't use those apps, do you have any suggestions on how you practice mindfulness right around bedtime?
I think that if you're having trouble falling asleep, then you've got to reset your brain to think of your bedroom as the place where you sleep. If you're not having trouble sleeping and you're using your apps for meditation or mindfulness in your bedroom and you don't have problems falling asleep or staying asleep, then it's not an issue. But if you're someone who does have a problem falling asleep, then you've got to create that association between your bedroom as a place to fall asleep. But in terms of the mindfulness apps and where you do them, as long as you're not having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, you should just, do your regular routine. But it's mainly for people who are having trouble either initiating sleep or maintaining sleep.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from our listeners? If not, Robin, let you wrap this up with any final words that you may have for our listeners.
Sure. I think a couple of things I'd like to emphasize. The legal profession before COVID-19 had a lot of well-being challenges. and the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing really prompted us to create a cultural change in the profession. And that's something, and that to me is not something that's nice to have. It's critical for our client service, for being leaders across the country, and being leaders in our families, and focusing on our own well-being and longevity and health of our families. So it affects everything we do. And so when I think about how we would create that cultural change, I don't think we're off course with COVID-19. We're just given another challenge, another thing that we're addressing that causes challenge to our commitment to well-being, because now we have even more things to do, and we have even more things to be stressed out about. And our leadership meetings are now focused on this whole how to respond to COVID-19, in addition to all the things we used to be doing. But I would say that the commitment to well-being has to be there first, because that's the foundation. If you're not well, if you're not at your peak ability to perform because you're not sleeping well, then you can't, all those other things are impacted, and you're shortchanging your life. I mean, I just think the neuroscience studies are just so profound and shocking to find out that, for example, even one day of sleep deprivation turns off certain genes that regulate, tumor growth, and turn on genes that are related to inflammation. I mean, just those things that you see, the immediate consequences to our physiology, and in terms of our threat to mental health and Alzheimer's, just are shocking. So what I would say is we remain committed as lawyer leaders to creating cultural change in the profession that promotes well-being, because we are the most unhealthy of all professions. So we got to change that. Okay, and future generations count on us to do that. How do we do that? We start talking more and more and more about the impact of sleep. And I will tell you, it's not just a negative impact you got to keep in mind, but if you can develop sleep strategies to enhance your performance. So if I want to enhance my performance in playing piano, or ski racing, or mathematics, or writing a novel, there are sleep strategies specifically designed to do that, to enhance your performance. So I say, don't just focus on well-being, to prevent problems from arising. Focus on your well-being so that you can actually thrive and be the best human being you can be, so that you can be that superhuman being that's out there and working so hard for your clients, for your communities, leading your lawyers through all sorts of things. So I encourage you to enhance and reaffirm your commitment to your own well-being in this crisis, because that's going to be something that makes all the difference for everything you care about.
Thank you very much, Robin. And to all our listeners, thank you for participating in today's session. Watch your emails for a message from us that would include a link to this session for the materials and any other handouts we have from this session. Please also visit the NCBP 21st Century Lawyer page for information about our next session. So until next time, all of you, please stay healthy and please stay safe. Thank you very much.